an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Sabriel by Garth Nix. Chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. In these chapters, Sabriel is over the wall, past the guards, past all of that, into the wintry wilderness. And there are already so many things that want to kill her. What's going on? They are waiting. This is very nerve-wracking. Dislike. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks to Abbey for commissioning this second episode of this book. I am really realizing how much of... And I always try and preface these kinds of statements with, I know how much fantasy there is out there that I have not read. There are some really big, quote, important fantasy series that I haven't read. And so... coming from that point of view, I don't have a huge point of reference for the many different types of magic, the different types of world building isn't the right word, but setting, I guess. And so I want you all to know that I recognize as I say things like this, that I'm speaking from a position of ignorance, and this is simply my own point of view and what I know of so far. But I am realizing how much my selection of reading focuses on, quote, the lighter aspects of magic and anything that has to do with death and darker, quote, magics is treated as a mystery to be left to those less scrupulous. And often as something that you need to graduate to after proving that you are capable with lesser magics and that you are a moral enough person with the integrity to not do anything sketchy to ensnare the will of people, yada, yada, yada. What I found really interesting as I read these chapters is that this world, that seems to be the case for most people, because necromancy in general does not seem to be viewed in a favorable light, except for Abhorsen. He is the exception, and thus his daughter even more so, because she is being taught magic by him that has to do with death from a very young age. So, she's only I think 17. And she is experienced in types of magic that I am not sure most magicians would have been at her age, without having maybe broken some rules or sidestepped some disapproving authority figures. And I find that really interesting, because the fact that this magic is not really something that is viewed favorably doesn't mean that people are ignorant of the magic itself. And there are a lot of creatures in this that are apparently sort of well known amongst people that live in the area, whether or not they're magicians themselves. And it's really reminding me a little bit of the Witcher series, in that they don't know how to cope with it necessarily, but they know what it is, and they know that there is someone that they can call on who can cope with it. And I find it really interesting that this world is set up in such a way that she comes across other people's magic all the time. And the way that these charter symbols flow and work after the fact is really interesting to me. So there's just a lot about the way magic works, everyone's attitudes about it, and overall the acceptance of it by everyone. And it's not that magic is only accepted north of this border, because magic is being practiced by some of the soldiers at the wall. Like, this isn't, she's being taught it in her school. But that there is, for some reason, the magic has more power north. And also she points out something later that I've highlighted about, like, the different stones that are placed at intersections of energy. And I am just really, really interested in how all of this works. This is the sort of thing that, like, I'm hoping will slowly be revealed as things continue. So, excuse me. So chapter 3, again, I estimated how far to read here because there are not page markers on these Kindle books, which is real frustrating. So I believe chapters 3 through 7 was about 50 pages. I think it was, like, just shy. So Horace, who is the man, the colonel, he is talking to her about what is going on in so far as her father's magic standing up to the test of time. Oh, Abbey says in my PM 51 pages, so dead on. PB. I don't know what PB. But good. 51 pages. Okay, cool. Oh, paperback. PB is paperback. Okay, cool. But yeah, he essentially is like, so, okay. How long do we have until this breaks? All of these bindings that have kept the dead from returning in the way that they had, which, if y'all remember, that was a big fucking problem. Big problem. And her father was able to do all kinds of different things that bound them. And she is trying very hard. And I really love the way that this is described. It depends, she said slowly, forcing herself to consider the question objectively without letting emotion interfere. Which really what it means is, I am all but in denial that my father's dead. And so I want to just lead with, it'll be fine, he's not dead. But I have to recognize that he may be. And if he is, they need to be prepared for that. So she says, if he's truly dead, the wind flutes will simply fall apart under the light of the next full moon. If he is trapped before the 9th gate, the binding will continue until the full moon, after he passes beyond, or a particularly strong spirit breaks the weakened bonds. So the moon will tell in time, said Horace. We have 14 days till it is full. It is possible I could bind the dead anew, Sabriel said cautiously. I mean, I haven't done it on this sort of scale, but I know how. The only thing is, if Father isn't beyond the 9th gate, then I need to help him as soon as I can. And before I can do that, I must get to his house and gather a few things and check some references. So at this point, the colonel starts to get a little bit condescending. And I don't mean that too harshly. I just mean that he is, initially really being like, deferring to her expertise. But once she admits that she doesn't know exactly how to get to the house, he starts to get a little bit snotty about it. And she has to be like, listen, buddy, I summon a guide to lead me. I've done it before and I know how, and that's the way that it works. So maybe cool your fucking jets a little bit there, which I approve of. Like, even if it is justified, whenever an older dude starts to get like this with a younger woman, my hackles fucking raise, So he talks about that, and there's all kinds of mentions of different types of magic in this. For example, she's talking about her book, her father's book. Only a trained necromancer could open that book, and only an uncorrupted charter mage could close it, which I think is really interesting. And then he mentions her father's Old Kingdom map, and said he was the only person who could see anything on it. It just looked like a square of calfskin to me. A small magic, he said, but since he couldn't teach it, perhaps not so small. Little things like that all over the place that are, enchanted to work certain ways that I find really interesting. And, it's there are so many different ways that magic can work. And, depending on what you are reading, and there are going to be things, like Harry Potter, it's a really childish type of magic because the magic isn't really the point. The magic is just an allegory for something else. Dresden Files, the magic takes an incredible amount of effort and energy, and so it is certainly possible to do, but it takes a lot, and thus the kind of sustained spell that we see here isn't as common in those books at all. Something like the Magician's Guild, which I just finished reading that series. I think it's called the Black Magician Trilogy. That is magic that is finite. It comes from your energy, but it comes from your energy in a very sort of like, what's the word I want? Like, it doesn't sap you the way that energy is sapped in Dresden Files when using magic. You don't feel it as you're doing it necessarily. It's just, like turning on a light switch kind of thing. And it's a lot simpler to do, but it isn't infinite like in Harry Potter where you can cast the same spell over and over again. There's so many different ways of doing it. And the fact that this book seems like the magic is largely pretty dependent on symbols is interesting to me. And I say largely because we see her cast some spells later that are not actual written spells, but she still has to picture the symbol for it in her head. And that I find like a really wild idea. Essentially, when she decides not to cast a spell, for example, when she, in the last chapter, she's getting through the wall and all these soldiers start to come at her and her instinct is to pull up something to defend herself. She realizes that this is not the place to do that and has to mentally put in some effort to blot out the symbol that she was thinking of in order to stop it from happening. And that's pretty wild. It's just a really interesting concept. So, he is explaining the way to get up, north, the way that they will probably take her. He tells her that he doesn't really have any men to spare to help her along the way, which on the one hand, she's like, well, I didn't expect to have an escort, so that's fine. But on the other hand, it's like she almost wishes that he didn't mention that could have been a possibility at all, because now she's thinking about how nice it would be to not be totally by herself out there, which, I feel her on that. There's so many times in my life where I'm like, man, I didn't need to know that this could have gone another way. Don't even tell me about that. That doesn't help anyone. It just makes me bummed out now. So he starts talking about a charter stone. He says, it was riven in two as if struck by lightning a month or so ago. The patrols have started to call it Cloven Crest, and they avoid it if possible. Its true name is Barhedron Hill, and the stone once carried the charter for a village of the same name. Before my time, anyway. If a village still exists, it must be farther north beyond the reach of our patrols. We've never had any reports of inhabitants from it coming south to Cloven Crest. The fact is, we have few reports of people, full stop. The garrison log used to show considerable interactions with Old Kingdom people, farmers, merchants, travelers, and so on. But encounters have become rarer over the last 100 years and very rare in the last 20. The patrols would be lucky to see even 2 or 3 people a year now. Real people, that is, not creatures or free magic constructs or the dead. We see far too many of those. I don't understand, muttered Sabriel. Father often used to talk of villages and towns, even cities, in the Old Kingdom. I remember some of them from my childhood. Well, I sort of remember, I think. Farther into the Old Kingdom, certainly. The records mention quite a few names of towns and cities. We know that people up there called the area around the wall the Borderlands, and they don't say it with fondness. So I find this really interesting that there has been a sort of pulling back from the border, and that has, in the last 20 years, since right before she was born, basically, it's become even more pronounced, and seeing people around that area is even more rare. Just real interesting. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like this is the kind of thing that leads me to want to be like, is there a prophecy or something, you know? But 3 years before she was born feels like too long before for that to have. But he says around 20 years, like around the last 20 years. So that might just be a rough estimate also. Or the trouble that led to there being a prophecy and her being born and being significant or whatever began before she was conceived, which is certainly possible. So anyway, she is realizing that she's going to have to ski all the way, and will have to move pretty quickly because she wants to get there before nightfall. And here's the part about the Charterstone. A broken Charterstone did not bode well, but there would be some magic there, and the path into death would be easier to tread. Charterstones were often erected where free magic flowed. Free magic is capitalized. And crossroads of the free magic currents were often natural doorways into the realm of death. Sabriel felt a shiver inch up her spine at the thought of what might use such a doorway, and the tremor passed through her to her fingers on the map. So, they're basically like the free magic sounds similar to something like ley lines on Earth, which is, you know, one of those things that's like debated on whether or not they're real. I'm so sorry about my throat, guys. I was doing fine, and I'm realizing like lately, if I eat anything, all of a sudden my throat starts to like get really uncooperative all of a sudden. But yeah, this dude starts to be like, listen, he sees that she's literally trembling a little bit as she thinks through what could be out there. And he says something about his daughter. And it's obviously, again, I don't want to say he's being condescending because he's really not here. He's being a little bit like fatherly. He's worried about her. She's very young. Oh, right. She says she's 18. Okay. I'm only 18 years old on the outside. But I first walked in death when I was 12. I encountered a 5th gate rester when I was 14 and banished it beyond the 9th gate. When I was 16, I stalked and banished a Mordicant that came near the school. A weakened Mordicant, but still. A year ago, I turned the final page of the Book of the Dead. I don't feel young anymore. And, you know, basically she's like, I can handle myself. It's fine. Just chill out. So they head out, and she is realizing just how bad the weather is out that way. And it turns out to be a really, really good thing that she brought her skis with her, because that helps a lot with getting through everything. The journey is pretty tough. Like, initially, she's thinking, maybe I'll cast a spell to keep myself warm, which it's pretty awesome that she can do that. That's even an option. But then she realizes, you know what, I'm going to be like doing one of the most, like, cross-country skiing is supposed to burn like more calories than almost any other kind of exercise. I feel like I remember reading. And she's going to be warming herself up pretty damn quick. However, it turns out to not really be enough. The cold and the snow is such that she starts to like freeze nearly solid by the end of her journey. And it's very, very difficult for her to push forward, except that she, at the end, has the motivation of what she believes is her mother from the other side telling her not to tarry and to like just keep it moving, girl. So before we get to that section, she reaches Cloven Crest. And this place it becomes really clear. First, she runs across some bodies, first of all. This one dude is frozen. His hand is sticking up out of the snow. And she touches him and is able to tell that he has been dead 12 days. It seems like he was maybe snuck up on, but he has his hand on his sword hilt. So it seems like whatever it was, maybe he like knew it was coming, but just not soon enough. And then she comes across some other bodies as well. This one guy, she does a spell in order to burn him to ash and send him on, is the subtext there. And let's see. There was an anxiety in her now that had been mostly academic before, and every sense was alert, watchful. She had always been told that the Old Kingdom was dangerous, and the borderlands near the wall particularly so, but that intellectual knowledge was tempered by her vague childhood memories of happiness, of being with her father and the band of travelers. Now the reality of the danger was slowly coming home. So she is not only in tune with the lives of people, but she's watching a hawk or a kite hunting, and she can actually feel the life disappearing of some small animal that this bird is hunting, which is pretty crazy. Like, I feel like that's too much. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you had this sort of ability, I feel like if you were able to tune in to that happening, that's one thing. But it doesn't seem like she has to. It seems like she just feels it. And I don't feel like that's fair. That seems like an awful lot to carry because things are dying all the time. And I can't help but wonder where that line draws. Is it like only mammals? Because I'm sure she can't feel it every time an insect dies, right? Because you're just walking around in the woods. That's just happening over and over and over again the entire time. So one would imagine there has to be a point at which that just like fades away, because that would be too much sensory feedback at all times. But anyway, beyond that, she can feel that there are more people that are dead. And this is like pretty serious. I'm trying to find the exact spot where she discovers. Let's see. Oh yeah, here it is. Sabriel expected to find the bodies on the road or near it, but they lay farther on. There were many footprints and churned up snow leading from the road towards the path to Cloven Crest. That path ran between the bluffs, following a route gouged out by a stream falling from some deep spring higher up in the hill. The path crossed the stream several times, with stepping stones or tree trunks across the water to save walkers from wet feet. Halfway up, where the bluffs almost ground together, the stream had dug itself a short gorge about 12 feet wide, 30 feet long and deep. Here the pathmakers had been forced to build a bridge along the stream rather than cross it. Sabriel found the rest of the Ancestarian patrol here, tumbled on the dark olive-black wood of the bridge, with the water murmuring beneath and the red stone arching overhead. There were 7 of them along the bridge's length. Unlike the first soldier, it was quite clear what had killed them. They had been hacked apart, and as Sabriel edged closer, she realized that they had been beheaded. Worse than that, whatever, had killed them, had taken their heads away, almost a guarantee that their spirits would return. The water beneath was partly iced over, slow and sluggish, but it was clear the soldiers had sought refuge over it. Running water was a good protection from dead creatures or things of free magic, but this torpid stream would not have dismayed even one of the lesser dead. In spring, fed with melted snow, the stream would burst between the bluffs and the bridge would be knee-deep in clear, swift water. The soldiers would probably have survived at that time of year. So I think that's really cool that, like, not cool that all of these people are dead, don't get me wrong, but really cool that, like, they know enough about how to use things like that to defend themselves for it to occur to them. And that sort of knowledge it's just a very different thing from, say, Dresden Files, where they're, regular human beings in our world wandering around with no knowledge that the supernatural world even exists, never mind really how to defend themselves from it. So this is a whole other thing where everybody knows and people are taught probably from children the best ways to defend themselves against basic things. But if you don't have the tools to hand, then there's not so much that you can do. And when it says that their heads had been taken, which meant like that they would almost definitely come back, I can't help but wonder, like, come back to where? Come back to the site of their death? Or come back to where their heads are? Because I feel like if you're taking their heads, that's something more than, like, it could just be a trophy, but I don't think so. I don't know. I don't like that at all. So without their heads, she could only bring them back as hands, a derogatory term that free magic necromancers used for their lackluster revenants who retained little of their original intelligence and none of their initiative. They made useful servants, though, either as reanimated corpses or the more difficult shadow hands, where only the spirit was brought back. A skilled necromancer could easily raise shadow hands from the heads of the newly dead. Similarly, without the heads, she couldn't give them the final rites and free their spirits. All she could do was treat the bodies with some respect and in the process clear the bridge. So yeah, it seems like this person took the heads because their spirits like come back near their heads. And I don't want to know why they need them. I don't like it. They're building some kind of army or they're trying to get information somehow. None of this is good. So as she conjures a small light in order to like light her way as she lays out their bodies. A slight magic, but one with unexpected consequences, for as she left the bodies behind, an answering light burned into brilliance on the upper post of the bridge. It faded into red embers almost immediately, but left 3 glowing charter marks. One was strange to Sabriel, but from the other 2 she guessed its meaning. Together they held a message. 3 of the dead soldiers had the feel of charter magic about them, and Sabriel guessed they were charter mages. They would have had the charter marks on their foreheads. The very last body on the bridge had been one of these men, and Sabriel remembered that he had been the only one not holding a weapon. His hands had been clasped around the bridge post. These marks would certainly hold his message. So, this is like a full-on recording. This isn't just him, like, typing out a text and it's only... This is a memory complete with the sounds going on in the background. People screaming, weapons, all of that. And he says, one of the great are dead. It came behind us almost from the wall. We couldn't turn back. It has servants, hands, a Mordicant. This is Sergeant Garin. Tell Colonel, and then the message cuts off and it seems pretty quick and evident that he was killed mid-sentence. And Sabriel is a little bit spooked by this because, first of all, the fact that he's saying like one of the great are dead, that's a big deal. But quite apart from that, just on a psychological level, for somebody who has dealt with death a lot in her life, she has never had to deal with hearing like the actual moments leading up to death. And this is a whole other thing. Like hearing the moment when somebody's life is taken away from them is a much different proposition than, going into death after the fact. And she really is shaken by it. And, hearing this and the body still being here, like, she's kind of fucked up over it. So she heads from there to Cloven Crest. And it becomes immediately apparent why so many people avoid Cloven Crest. Because that is what the Colonel was telling her. It's just like, everybody tries to sort of steer clear of it now. Well, this place has some bad vibes to it, evidently. And it seems pretty clear that the method in which this stone was broken is really sinister. Whomever it was, they killed someone in order to accomplish this. They sacrificed a charter mage. And it takes her a minute to like realize, because she sees this and she sees that there are some stains on it. And she's like, that's weird. What is that? And of course, me as a reader, I'm just like, it's blood. It's blood, lady. Be careful. That's blood. Like, of course, the moment that you hear that there's stains on it, it's just like, of course. And she stumbled backward, almost overbalancing into the snow. And it says, Sabriel knew how the stone had been broken and why the blood hadn't been cleaned away by rain or snow. Why the stone never would be clean, which is very interesting. A charter mage had been sacrificed on the stone, sacrificed by a necromancer to gain access to death, or to help a dead spirit break through into life. Whoopsies! And he says, what is it that the colonel said? That this has been broken for a few weeks now? So that seems to line up with right around when shit started to go down with her father, right? Like, feels like somebody brought something over, and that something is causing some problems. So she's thinking about the spell that somebody would have had to use for this sort of sacrifice. And she knows immediately what it is. It's not really, she didn't learn it in terms of how to use it. But it was one of the many things she seemed to have forgotten from that green-bound book, or had been made to forget. Only a powerful necromancer could use that spell. Only a totally evil one would want to. And evil breeds evil. Evil taints places and makes them attractive to further acts of. And she has to yell at herself, stop it, because she's starting to get into that headspace where she's just, spinning out of control in terms of, oh shit, that did this and this did that, so that means that this here and as somebody with fucking like anxiety, I know that feel, girl. Sorry about that. When your mind starts to like spin wildly out of control and all of the worst possibilities are the first things that you think of. And the thing is that because of the fact that this stone is really the only one that's like anywhere on these like this point of energy that this stone was marking for the free magic, it's the only one that comes before where she believes the house probably is. So in order to do this ritual that she needs to do to summon a guide, she has to do it here. And this is like a really bad spot, but there's not really another choice. And she has like a couple of moments of thinking like, maybe I should just, I don't know, like wait until tomorrow. And then she's like, what am I going to do? Sleep here? No, absolutely not. So she's going to go through with it and try really hard to protect herself as she can. Unfortunately, as we see, it doesn't really hold up. She's able to, she has to do 4 cardinal sign markers, north, south, east, west, in order to create a barrier around herself. But the northmost of those markers is close to the stone. And it takes a lot more effort than normal for her to place that. And even when she manages to do it, it's not as strong as the others. And sort of is like just dimmer and flickering a little bit. And it's pretty obvious that like, while this may do the job, it's certainly not going to do it flawlessly. It's not holding the way that everybody else is holding. So that already is giving me a lot of anxiety right here. Sabriel ignored it, quelling the nausea that had brought bile to the back of her mouth. She knew the north mark was weak, but golden lines had run between all 4 points, and the diamond was complete, if shaky. In any case, it was the best she could do. So here comes her summoning, or not summoning, ringing of the different bells that have to do with necromancy. And this is really, really cool. Rana, she said aloud, touching the first, the smallest bell. Rana, the sleep bringer, the sweet, low sound that brought silence in its wake. Mosrael, the second bell, a harsh, rowdy bell. Mosrael was the waker, the bell Sabriel should never use, the bell whose sound was a seesaw, throwing the ringer further into death as it brought the listener into life. Kibith, the walker, a bell of several sounds, a difficult and contrary bell. It could give freedom of movement to one of the dead, or walk them through the next gate. Many a necromancer had stumbled with Kibeth and walked where they would not. Dirim, a musical bell of clear and pretty tone. Dirim was the voice that the dead so often lost, but Dirim could also still a tongue that moved too freely. Belger, another tricksome bell that sought to ring of its own accord. Belger was the thinking bell, the bell most necromancers scorned to use. It could restore independent thought, memory, and all the patterns of a living person. Or, slipping in a careless hand, erase them. Sereneth, the deepest, lowest bell, the sound of strength. Sereneth was the binder, the bell that shackled the dead to the wielder's will. And last, the largest bell, the one Sabriel's cold fingers found colder still, even in the leather case that kept it silent. Asteriel the sorrowful, whispered Sabriel. Asteriel was the banisher, the final bell. Properly rung, it cast everyone who heard it far into death, everyone including the ringer. Sabriel's hand hovered, touched on Rana, and then settled on Sereneth. Carefully, she undid the strap and withdrew the bell. So, this is what she uses. And unseen by Sabriel, the inscription began again, but parts of it were not the same. I was made for Abhorsen to slay those already dead, was what it usually said. Now, it continued, the Clare saw me, the wall-maker made me, the king quenched me, Abhorsen wields me, says on this sword. But she doesn't see this, which I'm just like, girl, I want you to pay attention. Open it. Open your eyes. She travels into death. And this just makes her so vulnerable on our side that it just got me really twitchy. Like, twitchier than usual. First of all, she's standing there in our world, like frozen in place. And just so vulnerable, you guys. And she is not super well protected either. Like, just the whole way this goes down is just, but what is kind of cool, first she sends out this little paper boat that has a drop of her blood on it and sends it through the first gate, which is meant to summon the guide. And the guide is, it turns out, probably her mother. She has never asked specifically, but she just sort of takes it for granted that that is who it is. But she has been warned by her father that even though this is a really cool trick to be able to, like, come here and ask for help, that she must not rely on it too much. It's just not, it's the kind of thing that, like, a couple of times it will be free, and then it's just going to start to cost you something. And the cost is probably going to outweigh the benefit. So be sparing with it. But we don't find that out until a little bit later. First, we go to chapter 6, in which we get the POV of this creature. Y'all, this thing is super creepy. It had been human once, or human-like at least. That humanity had been lost in the centuries the thing spent in the chill waters of death, ferociously holding its own against the current, demonstrating an incredible will to live again. A will it didn't know it possessed before a badly cast hunting spear bounced from a rock and clipped its throat, just enough for a last few minutes of frantic life. By sheer effort of will, it had held itself on the life side of the fourth gate for 300 years, growing in power, learning the ways of death. It preyed on lesser spirits and served or avoided greater ones. Always the thing held on to life. Its chance finally came when a mighty spirit erupted from beyond the seventh gate, smashing through each of the upper gates in turn, till it went ravening into life. Hundreds of the dead had followed, and this particular spirit had joined the throng. There had been terrible confusion and a mighty enemy at the very border between life and death, but in the melee, it had managed to sneak around the edges and squirm triumphantly into life. Yo! What is that about, guys? Who is the foe on the very border of life and death? I feel like that has to be Abhorsen, but I could just be like trying to make everything about her and her family. Maybe. There were plenty of recently vacated bodies where it emerged, so the thing occupied one, animated it, and ran away. Soon after, it found the caves now inhabited. It even decided to give itself a name. Thralk. A simple name, not too difficult for a partially decomposed mouth to voice. A male name. Thralk could not remember what its original sex had been those centuries before, but its new body was male. Yeah. So apparently this thing preys on people, captures them, and consumes their lives, and that keeps him on this side of death. That's a lot. And Thralk can sense that there is a person nearby with a strong new life. And Thralk is like, ooh, sweet. Give me some of that good life. Thralk is like us when we're hungry and we like are walking out of a Target and there's a, Texas Roadhouse or a Chili's right there, and you can smell that like grilled meat smell on the air, and you're just like, oh God. And you're like, I shouldn't spend the money. I shouldn't take the time out to do this, but that smells so good. Give me a steak right now. That's Thralk. And he follows her up to where she's doing this ritual. And this bitch barely makes it. Oh, damn. It's so, oof. And it's really great because the way this is narrated, Thralk is coming for her while she's having this conversation with her mother. So as much as you're like, oh, cool, you can kind of talk to this weird glowing thing that's your mom, you're also like, enough with this. Please pay attention. There's a monster. And she said the thing is supposed to only answer questions. So she can't even just be like, having conversations with it. She could ask, are you my mom? But she doesn't, because I feel like she doesn't really want to know if it's not. So she asks how to get to the house, and the guide tells her in great detail how to get there. The kind of detail that I'm like, I hope that you actually wrote this down. She didn't. She remembers it. But I would not remember any of this. It is really intricate. And the guide says, go with love and do not tarry, do not stop, no matter what happens. Thank you, Sabriel began, carefully filing the words away with the accompanying thoughts. And just as she's about to ask another thing, the guide raises its arms and yells, go, and is looking almost over her shoulder. And when she comes back to herself, instinctually, she just shoots forward with that sword and slices right through this thing. It is a pretty cool little fight because there's so much happening here. This thing knows the sword and yells Abhorsen. It knows. Fire rose in Thralk's throat, but he spoke to distract this terrible opponent while his spirit tried to shuck the body like a snake its skin and retreat into the night. Abhorsen, I will serve you, praise you, be your hand. I know things, alive and dead. I will help lure others to you. But she uses Saraneth, the bell, that sends everyone to death. I I'm curious about this because I thought that she would also go because of the way that it was described as like sending everybody. Unless I have the wrong one. Hold on, let me see. This is page 887. Serenith is the binder. Oh, thank you. Okay. Abby's over here telling me. Thank you. So this thing is being bound to her will and shoved into death. And it is aware at this point that it is not going to win this. It's starting, like, it starts off thinking that it can sneak away. It's angry. It's enraged, really. But as she continues on, it starts to just get panicked because it's realizing it has outwitted death for hundreds of years, and it's just not going to be able to manage it anymore. Let's see. Here it is. Kibeth seemed to almost twitch in her hands, but she controlled it, swinging it backwards, forwards, and then in a sort of odd figure eight. The sounds, all from one bell, were very different to one another, but they each made a little marching tune, a dancing song, a parade. Thralk heard them and felt forces grip him. Vainly, almost pathetically, he struggled against them, knowing he couldn't break free. He knew that at last he would walk through every gate, to fall at last through the ninth. He gave up the struggle and used the last of his strength to form a semblance of a mouth in the middle of his shadow stuff. "Curse you," he gurgled. "I will tell the servants of Caragor. I will be revenged." And then he loses his will and gets pulled through. The twisting shadow simply disappeared, and there was only snow under a long dead corpse. Sabriel, meanwhile, is like, "Ooh, Caragor rings a bell, and I do not like that. What is that about?" But she's really remembering that her mom told her, "Get going and don't stop." So she leaves her off of like theorizing about that as she starts to really like push it and get on her skis again and head out. And I really enjoy this because of the simplicity of the setup here. Like, we get the introduction to the Charterstone and what it means and how this all worked and the attraction to darker things. Then we get the introduction to each of the bells and what they do, and almost immediately get a demonstration of how that works. So it's just smart in terms of like setting everything up and letting us know exactly how it all functions. So she heads on, and this is when it just really is brutal. Like, she's trying to use magic to keep herself warm, and at this point she could barely hold it together. Like, she'll cast a spell to warm and it goes out almost immediately. And as she finally starts to get, and this fucking killed me, she's realizing that there is something following her. Guys, I hate it so much. It's sort of reminding me of like in Lord of the Rings when they're in the dwarven caverns, and they're like, it just seems like every time they think that they have caught a break, it's not. They're getting attacked by somebody else or something else. It was snowing again, snowing sideways as the wind grew more frenzied, taking the snowflakes and whipping them into her eyes, now the only exposed portion of her entire body. Her boots were soaked too, despite the mutton fat she'd rubbed into them. Her feet, face, and hands were freezing, and she was exhausted. She'd dutifully eaten a little every hour, but now simply couldn't open her frozen jaws. Yikes, that's rough. Only the mother's spirit's warning kept her going. That and the sensation she was being followed. At first, she's like, maybe it's my imagination. But as she keeps going, she's like, no, there's definitely something there. So she gets to that path that leads to this door. And this door, her mother had told her, responds to the sound of the bell, Mosrael. And she is This moment kills me. Sabriel stilled it carefully and concentrated her senses, feeling for anything dead that might be near and should not be woken. There was nothing close, but once again Sabriel felt something behind her, something following her, something dead, something reeking of power. She tried to judge how distant the thing was before forcing it from her thoughts. Whatever it might be, it was too far away to even hear Mosrael's raucous voice. Sabriel stood up and rang the bell. It made a sound like tens of parrots screeching, a noise that burst into the air and wove itself into the wind, echoing from the cliffs, multiplying into the scream of 1,000 birds. She knew the thing behind her had heard. She felt it fix its attention on where she was, and she felt it quicken its pace, like watching the muscles on a racehorse going from the walk to a gallop. It was coming up the steps at least 4 or 5 at a time. Nope, don't like that. She sees it, and this thing is like pure flame. And she realizes that it is a Mordicant, which is fucking strong. A thing that could pass at will through life and death, its body of bog clay and human blood molded and infused with free magic by a necromancer and a dead spirit placed inside as its guiding force. She's like, okay, I guess I'm gonna die, and starts to desperately try and open this door, which was supposed to have opened with use of the bell. It's not until the bell finally fades out that the handle for it appears. And she's just able to stumble in through the door, and the thing is reaching in after her when this person appears. And then she realizes after this person fights the thing off temporarily. It does not kill it. It slices into this thing's arm. When she looks up, she realizes that this isn't a person. This is a person-like figure created from a bunch of different charter symbols all swirling together, which is so cool. Who wants to see this on screen? This girl. A strange body, black dots and red wash fading, revealing that her rescuer wasn't human at all. He had seemed solid enough, but every square inch of him was defined by tiny, constantly moving charter marks. He was a charter ghost, ascending. Yo! So this thing is go, 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 and directing her down this long hallway / cave thing. And she's heading down there, and she's running, and realizing as she's running, and this is the coolest thing, I think. She starts off walking because she's so exhausted at first. That's the best she can do. And the walk grew faster and faster, became a jog and then a run. It wasn't until she was almost sprinting that she realized why she could. Her pack and skis were still back at the lower door. Shit! Guys, ugh, I hate that. I hate that. She thinks about going back, and then she's like, what are you, fucking high? No. And then she realizes it was light, too. Charter marks ran in the stone, keeping pace with her. Charter marks for light, and for fleetness, and for many other things she didn't know. Strange marks, and many of them, so many that Sabriel wondered how she could have ever thought that a first in magic from an Ancelstierin school would make her a great mage in the Old Kingdom. Fear and realization of ignorance were strong medicines against stupid pride. Girl, preach. So, Sabriel is running flat the fuck out, and she finally gets to this spot where there is another one of these things that is helping her get through the next door. And it pulls her through the door, and on the other side there's this huge waterfall and river. And this new sending closes the door behind her and then pulls down this portcullis and locks the portcullis with a padlock. And she's watching all of this yeah, that's all very nice, but we know that's not going to keep it away forever. She has to cross this water. This will be plenty to keep her safe from the thing. So she looks up and realizes that in the middle of the river is this island, and that there's a building on it. And she recognizes the building. This is where she used to live. She knows what it is. And there's it's almost it's almost sweet, this like nostalgia trip for a second until you remember that she's being chased by a terrible monster. And like this thing wouldn't just kill her. This would kill her and then enslave her spirit after death. So it's not like that's her death is the only thing at stake here. This is something that could keep her prisoner for fucking who knows how long. And she'd be forced to do things, and it just, that sounds so horrible to me. I hate it. Oh, God. So she starts to hop the freezing ice-covered stones to get to the island. And she can feel the Mordicant like behind her somewhere. The steps led to the river but did not end there. Though invisible from the ledge, there were stepping stones leading out to the island. Sabriel eyed them nervously and looked at the water. It was clearly very deep and rushing past at an alarming speed. The stepping stones were barely above its boisterous wavelets, and even though they were so wide and cross-hatched for grip, they were also wet with spray and the slushy remnants of snow and ice. Whew. Dislike. This is the kind of shit that, like, if you put those in front of me on a pathway in my yard, I'd be fine. I'd be like, hop, 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 whatever, even with snow and ice on them. But you put a river around them instead, and I lose all confidence, all concentration, and all I can think about is how cold that water is, how long it would be till I drowned, and whether anybody would find my body. Like, it's just mentally, it's not even comparable, you know, even though they're technically the exact same thing. Nope. Don't like this at all. Also, what I just described, my distraction, would be during the best of times. That would happen if nobody was chasing me. She's being chased by a monster, so extra no thank you, please, on the side. So, she's just like watching the ice go over the edge of the waterfall, and is like picturing how that ice is going over it and smashing to bits on the bottom. And it's just like, oh, geez. Welp. And then she just does it. And as she starts to jump over it, she looks up and she can see the Mordicant standing on the ledge watching her. And this thing is casually holding the silver portcullis that had been lowered in order to keep it out. Like, it's just holding it like it's nothing, which is sort of funny. And also, like, so terrible, you know? And she realizes as she's watching it, it can't cross the river, but it sure can just wait. And she can't tell what it's waiting for. Maybe it was just waiting for her to inevitably have to leave the island at some point. Maybe it's waiting for something to happen. Maybe it's waiting for somebody to arrive. Dislike all of it. Don't care for it. Wearily, she made the jump to the last stone and collapsed on the steps of the landing stage. Even her eyelids could barely move, and her field of vision had narrowed to a little slit directly to her front. The grain of the planks of the landing stage loomed close, as she crawled up to the gate and half-heartedly fell against it. It opens, no problem, and she, like, falls into the courtyard. And there's a cat. And for a second, she's looking at the cat, just like, oh, cute. What a sweet little cat. I'm barely alive, but I still love cats. And then she sees its collar. The collar was only red leather, but the charter spell on it was the strongest, most enduring binding that Sabriel had ever seen or felt. And the bell was a miniature Sereneth. The cat was no cat, but a free magic creature of ancient power. Abhorsen, mewed the cat, its little pink tongue darting. About time you got here. Sabriel stared at it for a moment, gave a little sort of moan, and fell forward in a faint of exhaustion and dismay. Exhaustion and dismay. She's basically like, listen, I had a corpse chasing me. I had a being of fire chasing me. I had 2 guardians, actually 3. I had a dead mother guardian and then 2 sendings made out of charter symbols helping me out. But this talking bound magic cat, I fucking draw the line. I can't. Like, she's just, it's too much. She's done. And I really, like, hope that there's somebody there who can, like, drag her to a bed and help her, like, recover. Because if she's this fucked up and she just falls asleep out here, she's gonna die of exposure. She needs somebody to assist her. I'm just worried about her. Rosalie says, I'm barely alive, but I still love cats. Me. Yeah, that's fair. Even when I hate my cats, I still love them, but they're awful. But they're very cute, but they suck. But anyway, yeah, so I found that really funny. And it was a perfect stop for this section. So I decided to, because I was almost going to stop after chapter 7, because I misjudged my estimation the first time. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. And I did my math over again. And then I was like, okay, I think it's the end of chapter 7, not the beginning. And then once I reached the end of chapter 6, which is when the creature is like grabbing at her, I was like, oh yeah, no, I definitely would not have been able to stop here. This is not acceptable. So it worked out pretty well. But yeah, this is really, really interesting. I really like it so far. So thank you very much to Abbey for commissioning this. I have no idea what to expect here. Like, I really don't. I have no guesses. I know nothing. And Abhorsen, I guess, has to be her dad's, like, last name because everybody keeps calling her that. So I don't know how everybody, like, that creature that she stabbed knew her last name somehow. What's her father's first name? Do I need to know that? It might be a spoiler. I don't know. Don't tell me. Or maybe tell me. Maybe it doesn't matter. It's fine. But yeah, so guys, thank you all for hanging out with me. I had a couple people here this time. We got Rosalie, we got Abbey, we got Sea Star. Welcome to all of you delightful people. Abbey says his name is Terseal, though I don't think it comes up in the book. Okay, cool. Yeah, it's just like kept throwing me off because whenever they'd say Abhorsen, I thought they were yelling for her father. And I would get very confused. And then I was like, oh, it's his last name. So yeah, lots going on. Lots happening. But thank you all very much for hanging out with me. Thank you again to Abbey for commissioning this. And I will hopefully be seeing you all again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.